In the massive, sprawling lands of the Kingdom of Ozo, there lived a warrior whose name commanded absolute respect. His name was Ijahka. He was a towering, heavily muscled man built completely out of raw strength and countless battles. Everyone across the continent knew his terrifying legend, and absolutely no one dared to cross his path. But despite his fearsome reputation outside the village walls, Ijahka carried a deep compassion inside his heart. He deeply loved his people. He constantly traveled through his own kingdom and the neighboring villages, offering heavy protection and giving his wealth to the less privileged and those in desperate need. He was a ruthless warrior to his enemies, but a generous savior to the poor. Because of his heavy influence, Ijahka was frequently invited to gather with the High Lords. One evening, he received a grand invitation to a massive feast in the neighboring kingdom of Enyi. Ijahka gladly honored the invitation because the event was hosted by a noble man named Chief Boma, someone Ijahka considered a deeply trusted friend. When Ijahka arrived at the grand feasting house, the room was already packed with fellow noblemen. There was endless palm wine, heavy drumming, and wild entertainment displays. The house was full of joy, but as the night went on, Ijahka's sharp instincts picked up a strange pattern. Unfamiliar men started slowly entering the feasting house. Their faces were completely strange to Ijahka, and despite their attempts to blend in, they moved with the heavy, calculated steps of trained warriors. Soon, quiet whispers started passing through the eyes of the noblemen across the room. Noticing the sudden shift in the atmosphere, Ijahka calmly asked his friend if everything was all right. Chief Boma smiled warmly and assured him that all was perfectly good. But deep inside his gut, Ijahka's heavy instinct flagged pure danger. Shortly after the whispers, the entertainers were quickly ordered to leave the hall. Soon after, all the women in the room quietly joined them, followed by a few of the nervous noblemen who started slipping out the doors. Ijahka just sat calmly in his heavy wooden chair, slowly sipping his wine. He was absolutely not afraid of whatever was coming. But suddenly, the trap was sprung from the inside. Ijahka felt a violent, sharp, uneasy tear through his stomach. When he tried to stand up to walk outside and clear his head, his heavy legs failed him. He staggered violently and crashed hard to the stone floor. Intense, burning pain kicked in as he clutched his stomach. His drink had been heavily poisoned. He had been completely betrayed by the very friend who invited him. The entire feast was a carefully planned setup from the start, designed to make him lower his guard so he would feel perfectly comfortable. Still clutching his stomach in heavy pain on the floor, Ijahka watched as the disguised group of men completely dropped their act and approached him to finish the job. Looking at the edge of the room, Ijahka saw his trusted friend standing safely in the shadows. A wicked, victorious smile stretched across his face as he held his calabash wine cup. They fully believed they had finally defeated the great Ijahka. Unknown to the assassins, Ijahka always carried a heavy backup plan. He possessed a powerful, liquid antidote given to him long ago by the greatest medicine man in his kingdom. Just as the assassins closed in, fully thinking it was his final moment, Ijahka quickly dipped his hand into his pocket, pulled out the tiny container, and emptied the bitter liquid directly into his mouth. Instantly, it was as if a massive surge of raw energy exploded through his veins, violently forcing the poison out of his system. One of the heavy assassins swung a massive iron blade directly at his neck. Moving with blinding speed, Ijahka flawlessly dodged the fatal attack and rose to his feet in a single motion. He tightly clutched his bare fists and slammed them directly into the side of the heavy iron sword, completely shattering the thick metal into pieces with his bare hands. Before the assassin could even blink, Ijahka delivered a devastating punch straight to the man's jaw, instantly sending him to his ancestors. The rest of the assassin group panicked, but they aggressively maintained their courage. They were known as the absolute best killers across the continent, but they had never faced a living monster like Ijahka. They charged at him in perfect unison, but the grand feast house instantly turned into a bloody massacre. Ijahka delivered his heavy, deadly fists against them with terrifying precision. He instantly knocked them off their feet, launching their heavy bodies violently across the room, completely smashing the wooden chairs and tables into splinters. Their sharp weapons were absolutely nothing against him, because his heavily calloused, bare knuckles were deadlier and sharper than any forged sword. Within minutes, every single assassin laid completely eliminated on the bloody floor. Seeing the absolute destruction of their elite killers, the remaining noblemen and the masters who arranged the hit began fleeing for their lives into the dark night, including his treacherous friend, Chief Boma. But no one escapes Ijahka. Weaving through the dark dirt roads of the kingdom, he aggressively tracked them down one by one. Moving silently through the shadows, he caught the fleeing noblemen in their tracks, delivering a single, deadly fist to each of them. A heavy strike that absolutely no man had ever survived. Finally, deep in the woods, Ijahka caught up with his bleeding, terrified friend who had orchestrated the entire plan. Trembling in the dirt, the chief confessed the heavy reason why he wanted Ijahka dead. The nobles were deeply terrified of Ijahka's massive influence. Because Ijahka gave so much to the poor and protected the weak, the common people of the continent had started to love and worship Ijahka more than their actual kings. The Shadow Council of greedy nobles had heavily paid Chief Boma to completely eliminate the warrior before the commoners decided to make Ijahka their supreme ruler. Hearing the absolute cowardice in his friend's voice, Ijahka did not show a single ounce of mercy. He delivered the final, devastating strike. As he stood alone in the dark forest, wiping the blood from his indestructible knuckles, he realized a heavy truth. This was not the first time a group had tried to kill him, and it would not be the last. He had countless enemies in the world, but surviving the blade of a trusted friend proved to be the deepest, darkest cut of all. But the burning question remains: why would someone want a great, kind man like Ijahka dead? To understand this, we must take the story far back to when it all began. Growing up as a young boy, Ijahka was not a monster of strength. He was actually very weak, thin, and fragile. He was the only son of the kingdom's greatest blacksmith, a massive man famous across the lands for crafting heavy, unbreakable weapons. But young Ijahka was completely useless in the hot forge. His arms were too soft, and he could not even lift the heavy iron hammers to strike the glowing metal. Because of this, the strong village warriors constantly laughed at him and mocked him whenever they came to buy swords. His father tried everything he could to make his son strong just like himself, but all his plans failed. Desperate, the blacksmith enrolled the fragile boy into a harsh, brutal combat camp deep in the forest so he could be trained as a warrior. But the heavy training was too much for the weak boy. On the 6th day of being beaten and pushed into the mud, young Ijahka cried and ran away from the camp, returning home. His father looked at him with deep, heavy disappointment, ashamed that his only son was a coward. During that time, the kingdom was not a peaceful place. It was ruled by a terrifying, wicked man known as Warlord Kazi. The warlord did not inherit the crown. He took the throne by pure, bloody force. He planned a violent midnight coup, completely eliminating the old king, all the wise elders, and the sacred kingmakers. The poor people of the land called him the devil's ruler because of his pure cruelty. Warlord Kazi forcefully claimed whatever his dark heart desired. He stole the best farmlands, the biggest houses, and the fattest cattle. If any brave man tried to stand his ground against the king's greedy orders, that man would meet a fast, mysterious end in the dark and never be seen again. No one ever opposed the king and lived to see the next sunrise. The suffering people of the kingdom secretly gathered together, scraping up their tiny copper coins and the very little they had left to pay highly trained assassins to kill the wicked king. But not a single conspiracy ever succeeded. The assassins failed because Warlord Kazi was not a normal human. Through dark, forbidden magic, the wicked warlord's skin was literally as hard as solid granite stone. The most famous rumor of his power happened when a top-ranked, highly trained palace guard decided to end the king's cruelty. The brave guard quietly made his way into the king's dark sleeping chamber in the middle of the night. Standing over the sleeping warlord, the guard raised a sharp, heavy dagger and struck down with all his force. But the moment the sharp blade made contact with the king's bare chest, the iron dagger violently snapped and broke into two completely useless pieces. The noise woke the warlord. He arose from his bed and aggressively attacked the guard. The guard tried his best to fight back, knowing fully well that there was no running away. But he was no match for the king. The dark magic did not just give the king stone skin. It also gave him the terrifying ability to deliver a brutal, crushing fist. The guard simply could not stand the heavy blows. The king's dark magic completely overpowered him, sending the brave guard straight to his ancestors. When it was over, the warlord calmly called his other guards, ordering them to drag the broken body out of the bloody chamber. By morning, the terrifying news of what happened in the night spread rapidly across the entire kingdom. The dead guard's body was staked high on a tall wooden pole right outside the massive kingdom entrance. It stood as a bloody warning to anyone who ever thought about standing against the throne. Seeing the staked body, the people became even more terrified of their king. His property claiming continued to grow worse. When Warlord Kazi eventually learned that the poor people had secretly gathered coins to conspire against him, he punished the entire land. He aggressively tripled their weekly tributes. The suffering became way too much for the poor villagers to handle. The king's ruthless warriors began kicking down the doors and entering the homes of people who could not meet up to paying the heavy tributes. The warriors beat up entire families in the dirt, and sometimes they eliminated innocent fathers in cold blood just to set a cruel example. Ijahka's father soon became a major victim of this royal humiliation. Because he was the greatest blacksmith in the kingdom, the ruthless warlord demanded a massive supply of heavy weapons for his army. But the wicked king demanded the weapons without paying a single coin or giving the blacksmith the raw iron and coal he would need to make them. Fearing for his family, Ijahka's father gathered together the very little supplies he had left in his shop and started making the weapons. The forge burned day and night, but soon he completely ran out of iron. Left with no choice, he boldly walked to the grand palace. He stood before the wicked king and demanded raw supplies and fair payment so he could finish the massive project. Warlord Kazi flatly refused. The king arrogantly claimed that the blacksmith had been making so much wealth from selling to the kingdom's warriors and had never given anything back to the throne. But Ijahka's father was a smart man. He pulled out a heavy scroll, giving the king a detailed record of the countless times he had voluntarily given the throne his finest, sharpest weapons as a free gift of support. He proved the king completely wrong right in front of the royal court. Instead of understanding, this deeply annoyed the prideful warlord. His eyes turned dark with anger. He gave Ijahka's father exactly 1 day, warning the blacksmith that he would personally come to the forge tomorrow to collect every single weapon he demanded. Ijahka's father left the palace in heavy anger. There was absolutely no way he could afford to get the raw supplies for that massive amount of weapons. It would cost a massive fortune in gold that he simply could not afford. Returning to his quiet forge, he looked at his weak son, put out his fires, and dismissed the warlord's impossible request as pure foolishness, preparing his heart for whatever dark fate was coming tomorrow. The very next morning, the wicked warlord Kazi arrived at the blacksmith's forge with his heavy royal guards, brutally demanding the massive supply of weapons. Just as before, Ijahka's father bravely stood his ground. He told the king the exact same truth. He simply did not have the resources to fund the greedy demands of the throne. The warlord became incredibly upset. He barked a dark command, and his heavy warriors rushed forward. They grabbed the blacksmith, forcing him to his knees in the dirt right in front of his own shop. 2 strong soldiers held his arms tightly so he could not move. Then the warlord stepped forward. Using his terrifying, stone-hard hands, the king began punching the helpless blacksmith like a training bag. He delivered countless, brutal heavy fists all over the poor man's face and jaw. Ijahka's father groaned in terrible pain, completely helpless. His workers stood frozen in fear, unable to do anything to help. Ijahka himself, who was just a fragile, weak boy, stood totally frozen. He was forced to watch the horrific moment as the wicked warlord murdered his father in cold blood. Even when his father finally went completely still and stopped making sounds, the cruel king never stopped punching. He was deeply enjoying the bloody moment. When the warlord was finally done, he dropped the lifeless blacksmith into the dirt. The poor son rushed to his father's side, weeping bitterly, but the great blacksmith was no longer breathing. The wicked warlord laughed, loudly declaring that the blacksmith's shop was now the absolute property of the throne. He wiped the blood from his stone hands and marched away with his guards, leaving young Ijahka sobbing on the ground. But after a few moments, Ijahka's crying completely stopped. The tears dried up. He slowly stood up and began to walk out of the village without saying a single word to anyone. One of his relatives, who had heard the terrible news, ran up and tried to stop him, knowing the boy was out of his mind with grief. But Ijahka violently pushed the relative backward and disappeared straight into the thick bushes. No one knew where he was going, but the dark, cold look on his face said it all. The weak boy had died, and a new, terrifying monster had been born. Walking alone, Ijahka thought deeply to himself. He realized that if he had not been such a weakling, he could have fought with force to save his father's life. He slept alone in the dark forest, unable to face any other human being. When he woke up the next morning surrounded by quiet trees, he made a heavy, unbreakable promise to his own soul. He would never be weak again in his life. He walked directly back to the harsh, brutal combat camp deep in the woods, the exact same camp he had cried and ran away from years ago. The old training master was completely shocked to see the boy walk back into the camp on his own two legs, without his father dragging him. The master read the dark anger on the boy's face. He knew something terrible was wrong and demanded to know what happened. Ijahka did not explain the tragedy. He simply told the old man that he had finally learned a heavy truth. In this world, there is absolutely no justice for weak men, and only the strongest survive. The master felt pity and offered the boy a warm meal to welcome him, but Ijahka completely refused. He stated coldly that he did not come there to eat. Before the official training even began for the day, Ijahka walked straight to the training grounds and took up the most brutal exercises he remembered. He trained far longer than any of the other warriors. Even when the daily training was completely over, he refused to rest. Even when his muscles were screaming and his body was tired, his spirit refused to give up. During group training, all the boys were ordered to lift a massive, heavy stone and balance it while standing perfectly still on one leg. One by one, the other boys gasped out and dropped their stones in defeat. But Ijahka completely refused to drop his stone, even when his entire leg was violently shaking from the heavy pain. When the master ordered them to punch thick, hard tree trunks with their bare hands, the others would eventually stop when the pain became too much. But Ijahka refused to stop. He punched the hardwood over and over again, even when his knuckles split open and his hands were completely covered in blood. The brutal training continued. They were taught fighting skills, sword skills, and the art of the deadly fist. Ijahka became completely obsessed with the art of the deadly fist, working heavily on making his punches as destructive as possible. Whenever a fight was set up among his fellow trainees, Ijahka completely destroyed them, beating them up easily like little children in sword fights and hand-to-hand combat. Soon, he became so strong that he stopped competing with his fellow trainees entirely and started fighting and defeating his own masters. 2 full moons passed. The weak, fragile boy was completely gone, replaced by a massively strong, heavily scarred warrior. But physical strength was not enough. To defeat a king made of solid stone, Ijahka knew he needed something more. He had heard quiet stories about ancient legends who possessed a deadly, magical fist that could easily shatter heavy iron into pieces. He became obsessed with finding the answers. He asked the old master about it. The master became very afraid, warning Ijahka to stop seeking such dark answers. The old man explained that those ancient legends got their magical abilities through dark, deadly rituals that usually claimed a man's life. But Ijahka absolutely did not care about the danger. One afternoon, when the old master was away from the camp, Ijahka sneaked directly into the master's private room. He searched deeply through the ancient, dusty library until he finally found a hidden, heavy scroll that held the exact answer he was looking for. The scroll described a terrifying ritual. It revealed a secret location high up in the deepest mountains. The scroll warned that during the ritual, the host would fall into a deep, magical sleep. While unconscious, the gods of the mountain would violently test the man's willpower in the spirit world. The man would be forced to fight against different powerful spirits. If he won the battles, the gods would grant him their supernatural gifts in the real world. But if he failed, his spirit would be completely destroyed, and he would die in his sleep. That was all Ijahka needed to know. In the middle of the dark night, Ijahka packed his few belongings, left the combat camp, and set out alone toward the towering, Forbidden Mountain. Ijahka's journey to the Forbidden Peak was not easy. For several days, he climbed the massive, sharp rocks of the ancient mountain. The higher he went, the colder the wind became, violently pushing against him to throw him off the cliffs. His hands bled from gripping the sharp stones, and his body was deeply exhausted. But the heavy memory of his father's death kept pushing him upward. When he finally reached the absolute top of the mountain, the air was completely still. He found the sacred, ancient stone circle described in the scroll. Following the instructions perfectly, Ijahka sat in the center of the rocks and prepared his mind. He drank the bitter herbal mixture required for the ritual and closed his eyes. Within seconds, his body went completely numb, and he fell into a deep, dark, heavy sleep. Ijahka woke up in a strange, fiery world. The sky was glowing with bright orange light, and the ground was made of burning coal. This was the spirit realm. Before he could even understand where he was, the massive gods of the mountain appeared. They were terrifying, towering spirits of war who completely surrounded him. The gods did not ask questions. They simply attacked to test his pure willpower. For what felt like endless days, Ijahka fought the ancient spirits using only his bare hands. He was knocked down countless times, bleeding and broken, but his heavy spirit completely refused to stay down. He fought with pure, unstoppable rage. He punched, kicked, and overpowered the massive spirits one by one until the final god bowed in defeat. Seeing that his willpower was completely unbreakable, the gods granted him the supernatural gift he desperately wanted. They forced his bare hands directly into the magical, glowing fire of the spirit realm. Ijahka screamed as the heavy magic fused with his flesh. When he finally woke up in the real world on top of the cold mountain, his body had changed. His fists were heavily scarred and possessed a deep, hidden, magical heat that could shatter anything on earth. When he struck his fist on the floor where he stood, the entire mountain shakes. Ijahka did not waste a single moment. He marched straight down the mountain and headed directly for the grand palace of warlord Kazi. He did not sneak in. He kicked the massive front gates completely open. The king's heavy soldiers immediately rushed forward to stop the intruder. But this time, Ijahka was no longer a weak boy. As the soldiers swung their thick iron swords, Ijahka simply raised his bare hands. The moment the swords clashed with his magical fists, the heavy iron weapons violently shattered into tiny pieces. Ijahka delivered fast, brutal punches, sending the elite palace guards flying across the courtyard. He completely cleared the entire army single-handedly in minutes. Hearing the absolute chaos, warlord Kazi stepped out of his royal chamber. The wicked king laughed, fully trusting his dark magic and his solid granite skin. The king charged forward and delivered a heavy punch, but Ijahka smoothly dodged it. Clenching his magical fists, Ijahka struck the king squarely in the chest. A loud, explosive cracking sound echoed through the entire palace. The king's unbreakable granite skin violently shattered like cheap clay. The warlord crashed to the ground, completely defeated and destroyed by the very boy he had orphaned. Seeing their invincible king destroyed by a single punch, the remaining soldiers were gripped by pure terror. They immediately dropped their weapons in the dirt and completely surrendered. The heavy darkness over the kingdom was finally broken. The wise elders of the land quickly gathered and appointed a new, good-hearted king to the throne. Peace was restored, and the suffering people were finally free from the brutal taxes and cruelty. The new king heavily honored Ijahka. He returned the blacksmith's shop back to him, fully restoring his father's legacy. The king also heavily compensated Ijahka with chests of gold, paying him every single coin his father had been cruelly denied. Ijahka took over the forge, but he did not use normal hammers. He used his supernatural, heavy iron fists to pound the glowing metals, crafting the sharpest and strongest weapons the world had ever seen. As time passed, his fame expanded massively. The stories of the warrior who could shatter solid iron and defeat a stone king traveled across the entire continent. Wealthy traders from faraway kingdoms traveled for months just to buy weapons from him. His massive business continued to grow, making him incredibly wealthy. But Ijahka never forgot where he came from. He used his massive wealth to feed the hungry and protect the weak. To the wicked, he was a terrifying monster with deadly fists. But to the poor people who had suffered so much, Ijahka was the ultimate savior. As the years passed, Ijahka's heavy forge brought him massive wealth, and his deep kindness brought him the absolute love of the common people. He was worshipped as a living legend across the land. But this heavy fame brought a dark shadow of jealousy. The greedy noblemen and the remaining corrupt warlords grew deeply envious of the blacksmith. They hated that a common man had more influence and wealth than they did. Driven by pure jealousy, these enemies began sending highly trained assassins and dark, wicked sorcerers to eliminate him. But every single attempt failed in spectacular ways. Ijahka was constantly ambushed, but he always turned the attacks into completely one-sided victories. During one massive ambush on a dirt road, 20 elite warriors and 3 dark sorcerers surrounded him. The sorcerers aggressively chanted dark spells, throwing heavy bursts of dark fire toward him, while the warriors charged with poisoned spears. Ijahka simply let out a heavy sigh, deeply annoyed that his peaceful walk was interrupted. He clenched his fists, activating his supernatural heat. With a single, blinding punch to the ground, he sent a massive shockwave of pure force that completely blew the dark fire away and knocked the sorcerers unconscious into the bushes. As the warriors attacked, he effortlessly shattered their heavy spears with his bare knuckles, knocking them all out with fast, precise strikes. He left the entire group groaning in the dirt and calmly walked back to his shop to finish his daily work. For a long time, Ijahka simply thought the noblemen were attacking him because they hated his wealth. But the real reason was much deeper and far more political. The current good-hearted king of the land had fallen completely ill. The royal healers confirmed that the king was not going to survive the changing of the seasons. Knowing the throne would soon be empty, the sacred kingmakers of the land had secretly gathered in the shadows. They completely bypassed all the greedy noblemen and officially chose Ijahka to be the next supreme ruler of the kingdom. The corrupt nobles found out about this secret decision. They desperately wanted the heavy throne for themselves, which was the true reason they constantly sent assassins to kill the blacksmith. Ijahka, however, was completely oblivious to all this political plotting. He was just a man who loved his forge and his peace. Everything changed on the heavy day the sick king finally passed away. While Ijahka was working in his shop, the sacred kingmakers, accompanied by the royal guards, marched directly to his forge. They bowed deeply in the dirt before him, officially revealing that the gods and the ancestors had chosen him as the new supreme king of the land. Ijahka was completely shocked, but he saw the heavy hope in the eyes of the common people gathered around him. He accepted the heavy responsibility. Before his grand coronation, Ijahka took a beautiful, wise woman from the village as his wife, making her his royal queen. The entire kingdom erupted in massive, endless celebrations, completely overjoyed that their greatest protector was now their ruler. Ijahka ruled the massive kingdom with absolute peace, harmony, and heavy justice. The corrupt nobles were completely silenced, knowing the new king could shatter their skulls with a single punch. Ijahka and his queen had many children. Remembering his own painful childhood as a fragile boy, Ijahka made sure none of his children would ever feel weak. He did not force them into brutal, cruel camps like his father did to him. Instead, he gently and patiently taught them the ways of the heavy forge, the art of defense, and the pure power of a strong mind. His children grew up to be massively strong, kind, and deeply respected, just like their father. Unlike the tragic legends of the past, Ijahka did not fall to his own power. He lived an incredibly long, joyful, and peaceful life. When his time finally came, he departed the world calmly in his sleep as an old, happy man, leaving behind a kingdom that was perfectly safe and completely unbreakable. Today, when people hear the name Iron Fist, they think of a modern comic book story. They picture a wealthy, spoiled billionaire child whose airplane crashed in the snowy mountains. They think of a man who trained in a glowing, magical city in another dimension just so he could return to the modern world, put on a green and yellow mask, and fight corporate villains in shiny glass skyscrapers. But long before modern writers created the billionaire martial artist, the true, raw legend of the indestructible fist was already forged in the ancient dirt. The real Iron Fist did not fight for corporate money in a modern city. He was a grieving blacksmith's son who plunged his bare hands into the magical fires of the gods just to destroy a cruel warlord made of solid stone. He did not wear a bright superhero costume. He wore the heavy scars of a man who refused to be weak. So, the next time you see the Iron Fist glowing his hand on your screen, ask yourself, is he just a modern comic book creation? Or is he the forgotten, peaceful shadow of Ijahka, the immortal African king who showed the world that the strongest weapon on earth is a pure heart backed by a heavy, unbreakable fist?